we are in Central Oregon with Tumalo Bee Academy and the Bees News. It's not really spring, it's February, but we've had spring-like weather for about the last couple of weeks now. These beehives have been wrapped for winter, and whether you can see or not, we do actually have pollen coming in the door already, and we are not even in the middle of February yet. So what we're going to do today is our initial spring inspection, which we do typically do on the first nice warm day in February. This year we have a lot of nice warm days in February, so it's time to take a look at them, see how the brood chamber looks, what kind of food stores they have left over to get them into the real summer coming on. So the first thing we'll do is we'll unwrap the bee colony. This is a simple wrap. We use tar paper, keeps them dry, and it absorbs heat in the winter when the sun hits it. Normally we don't reuse this, but if we're careful we can. You'll notice that we do have a small entrance reducer on the front of the colony. This helps to keep mice out in the winter, and also late in the fall it keeps the predator bees from finding their way in. We got them wrapped up like a Christmas present. There we go. All right, before I actually open this colony, I'm going to pull out the inspection board in the back and see if we have any mites that have dropped off late in the winter. So what we actually have here is this is a wax cappings that they've pulled off to get to the honey during the winter months, and it doesn't appear that we have, oh, there isn't one mite right there. And there is another one, so there's a couple. So we might want to do, and which we won't do today, but we may want to do a mite count on this colony when we get a really nice day. And so I've counted, just in a quick look here, I've only counted 4 mites, which is a good sign. So we'll clean that off. And then we'll reinsert this so that the next time we look, we have a fairly clean board. And we'll be able to tell if there's still any residual mites coming down off of there. On top of this colony, we have an insulation box. And the insulation box is filled with wood chips and a little wool blanket on the bottom. So we'll pull that off there. And then we have our inner cover. And as you can see, we have a few bees right there poking their heads out. We'll very gently break the seal on this. This has been sealed up since last fall. try to make it not snap when I do it. There we go. Nice and gentle. And there's our frames. 2-story, 10-frame colony, 20 full-size frames. And just looking down inside, they still have a lot of honey up on top. That's a very good sign for this time of year. Not a lot of bees up here, which is an indication that the queen is still down in the lower box and probably has started her brood chamber down there, as they didn't use enough stores for her to move up into the top box and start up here. That's not to say that there may not be some brood on the lower part of the frames in the center here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a few frames out of the top box, work our way to the center, and see if they've actually come up into the second box or if they're all still down in the bottom. I'm going to start on the outside edge here. I have very little honey, or very little wax over here. Just a little bit of wax between these two frames. And I can separate that. And this will be the first frame I take out. That way I'm not going to injure anybody. There's really nobody over here. A few, but not a lot of bees in this section. And there we have, still against the wall, a full frame of honey. So they've got lots of stores in this area anyway. The other side that is actually against the wall has a few cells that are not filled, but for the most part, this frame is still a good full frame of honey. So we'll set that one aside. And we'll go to the next one. And this frame is also full of honey. So this tells me that the bees have wintered quite well. They never even got up in here to use these stores. We did have a fairly mild winter compared to last year. And I'm going to go ahead and set this one aside too. Making sure I remember which way they came out so that I can put them back in the same position. Now I've created enough space over here to where I can just move these frames until I get to the middle, and then I will have an opportunity to see if the queen is actually up in this box, which I'm betting that she isn't, just by the amount of full frames. So here's some area where, going into fall last year, that they didn't completely evaporate all the honey out of these cells as they were bringing the nectar in. And so these cells were never capped. With the little bit of excess moisture that was still inside here, some of these cells have started to sugar, which is not a bad thing. As the weather warms and the bees bring more water in, they will make that back into a liquid and utilize it. Now here's a frame that's fairly close to the middle, and it is drawn out for the most part. Still quite a bit of honey on this side of it. And again, you see some of the uncapped cells that they were filling up towards the latter part of the honey flow in 2017. So we'll turn that one back around the way it came out of there, insert it. And the queen is not up in this box, as this next frame is quite full of honey. A few little empty frames over on this side. They've packed some pollen in right here, which is probably fresh pollen because it's the bright yellow that we're seeing the bees fly in the colony with. So they're using the space that's empty at this point to start storing that pollen upstairs. And there is no sign of larvae up here at all. So we're going to set that back in there. And then we're going to remove this box. I'm going to leave these two frames out because this thing is pretty heavy right now because it's got a lot of honey in it. So I'm going to leave these two frames out. I'm going to take this box off and I'm going to set it down on this inner cover so that any bees that are hanging out on the bottom here don't get squished when I set it back down. And again, I want to be real gentle. Try not to disturb them any more than necessary.
That weighs, Steve?
Oh, I'd say that weighed about 65 pounds.
Really? Oh my God.
So here's the cluster of our bees right here. I'm going to take some of this excess wax off the top of the frames before I actually get in there. That way when I put the box back together, I don't have to worry about smashing any bees in between the wax that they've built up on top of these frames. Between the frames they build this in there. This can be saved. You can utilize it for candles, or a lot of people use it for cosmetics now. Looks like I broke the seal on a little honey right there, so I'll set that right here and they'll start taking that back inside. Brood chamber is probably pretty small still, but I would really like to take a look at it. We have a nice day. It's about 63 degrees out here right now. So I really would like to get down inside the brood chamber and see what kind of activity there is going on. See how quickly she's going to build up. Typically, the queen will start laying eggs in Central Oregon about mid-January, and we're about almost to mid-February. So we should have a decent little brood chamber going already. Okay, again, I'm going to come over here, and in this situation I'm going to take the second frame out because the first frame is glued to the wall pretty well. And the second frame will be the one that I might be able to get loose. They've got it glued together pretty well too. Always want to take your time and be patient. These bees have a lot of stores, and there's not a lot of bees. As you can see, it's a small cluster for a 2-story colony. So I'm very curious to get into there and see what kind of brood she has going. Oh. Bottom box is quite light. So they've used up most of the supplies down here. They certainly did have a lot of propolis in between these frames though to glue them in there. And this is typical of what you would see in the spring. There's a lot of empty cells. Again, we have some of the honey has sugared that they didn't get capped last year. So a very light frame. This frame was built out of wired wax foundation, and you can see that they've eaten the wax away on the corners and down underneath, and you can see the little wires sticking down. So something about that end of the foundation they didn't like. They don't like it, they haul it out the door. Again, a fairly empty frame, which is typical in the bottom box this time of year. Now we're getting close. And the bees are storing pollen over in this section where you see them kind of working. Again, we see some of the uncapped honey going into winter. We're almost where I want to be. And here is a lot of fresh pollen that they've been bringing in up in this corner. I don't know if you can see the bright yellow, but this corner here is the same color of pollen that they're bringing in the door. And they're actually storing it on both sides near the front. Very, very small group of bees left after the winter. This next frame here is going to tell me whether or not we've got a working queen. I want to be pretty gentle. She could be on this frame. Ah, there we have it. There's our first spring brood. Right up in this corner, you see the capped cells. That's the spring brood where she started laying eggs. And she has a little bit of it on both sides. And I'm going to actually, Jason, how we doing? Can I bring this closer? Or right there? Okay. So we're going to take a little closer look at this. Okay, so what we have here is we have capped brood, and then on this upper corner here we already have larvae in the probably the 3/4 stage. It has not been capped yet. And I take a little closer look, and we have clear out as this far. We have eggs and what is called a milk larva. It's the eggs that have just recently hatched out, probably 5 to 7 days old, and it has kind of a milky look to it. Now I don't see the queen on this frame. I'm going to look at the other side here real quick, see if she's over here.
You put it right where you flip it around.
And we have a bee with pollen. And I do not see the queen on this frame. We know she's in there though, because we have eggs and larvae. I'm going to slide this one back down in there.
This is her second year, right? So she's not going to go out and
Yeah.
fly or anything.
Well, if the colony builds up to a point of swarming, she will. But this little colony has a long ways to go. They're starting out quite small. And we do have some brood here. And I still don't see her. And I still don't see her, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking for her. What I really wanted to see is that they did have brood, and we don't want to leave that brood out here too long, even though it's in the 60s. We want to kind of close them back up, let them get that temperature back up inside, and look at them again in probably in 3 weeks to see how large the brood chamber has grown. They have plenty of stores. So the only thing that really I would do with this colony is maybe add a little bit of pollen patty right in here so that they have that extra available to them. So these are pre-made pollen substitute. You can buy them at most of the bee supply houses. Always nice to have some on hand this time of year. And we're going to unwrap that, maybe. And I like to take all this off of there. The bees will do it themselves, but it saves them time if I can get it off of there. And actually, that doesn't have anything on it. So I'm going to set that right in there, right above the brood chamber. And I was very careful to make sure there were no bees on top of the frame when I put it in there. And then we're going to set this box back on top. Oops. And there's our first wasp of the year. And now he's no longer. Here we are again, Tumalo Bee Academy with the Bees News. And this is our second spring inspection colony. This one is only one box high. It's not a two-story colony. And what we want to do again is look to see what kind of brood we have going on in there and what kind of stores they have. If you'll remember the first inspection we did, the bees had plenty of stores upstairs. It was a very small brood chamber, and but she was laying eggs, and there was new larvae and new eggs and capped brood, and so we're hoping we find the same thing in this one. We'll remove our winter dressing. See how I put it on there. This one I did in the front. I like the black tar paper. It works real well. See a little bit of moisture on the inside there, but overall it keeps the bees good and warm in the winter. Especially if you have them in an area where the sun will hit them, even on those very cold, frigid days. It's going to warm that box up a little bit inside that black covering. And they're all out here trying to figure out what I'm doing. There we go. Again, underneath the cover here, we have our small insulated box, which is only about 4 inches, 3.5 inches. This one, we put the shavings inside of a bag so that they're not such a mess. And then of course we have our little wool blanket, and underneath that we have the remnants of fondant, which is a little bit of winter food that we put in there for them, and they've actually eaten most of it. Set that aside. Take our insulator box off. And these bees here didn't quite have as much going in the winter. One reason is because it was just a single box. But it still appears that they have lots of stores out here on this edge. This last frame will take it out. Break that glue loose. And lift it up gently. Actually appears to be a few more bees in this small colony than there were in that larger one. This queen was new last year, and she kind of got off to a slow start. I was a little bit concerned about her. So this is the frame against the wall. It's about half, 3/4 honey on one side and virtually nothing on the other side. So we'll set that one aside. Again, just a swath of honey down the center. And the other side is about 2/3. And we're only 2 frames away from being in the middle of this cluster. It's always nice to move slow and consistently when you're working with your bees. Fast, jerky movements tend to kind of set them off, get them a little aggravated. So if you can just be slow and methodical and sometimes even talk to them a little bit. So this frame here, which is actually kind of close to where I'm thinking I should find the brood chamber, has a pretty good amount of honey and some empty cells at the bottom. And I like that because that's where that queen's going to start laying eggs, is down under here. And she's got this food source up above. So looking at the next frame from my angle, it looks pretty empty. So unless there's brood on the other side of it, I may move this frame in closer. So I'm actually going to set that one aside too. Very, very careful not to pinch anybody. They set off a little pheromone if you squish one of them that kind of triggers the rest of them to be aware. And again, we have a lot of pollen stored in this frame. I see no brood, but you can see the bright yellow pollen in this area of the frame. Okay, I do see a little bit of brood on this next frame. And these girls here, they're really curious now as to why I'm in here. As you see them starting to fly around me. Okay, so we do have a brood pattern started. This is a little bit more typical of where I would normally see a brood this time of year. It's kind of towards the center of the frame, which would be in the center of the box. And let me take a look here so I can explain what I'm seeing. Oh yeah, okay. So we have some cells that have already hatched out. As I mentioned earlier, she starts laying eggs about mid-January. So we have some cells that are already hatched out. A little bit of larva around it, but out here on this outer edge, and I don't know if we can see it with the camera, but down in those cells are eggs. And that's what we want to see, is lots of eggs. It actually comes out to about this wide of a circle. So she's laying a good number of eggs in there. And I want to look at this side real quick. And I have the same thing on this side, and there's the queen. So I'm going to turn this frame around. And the queen is right up in here. Let me see if I can, there she goes. She's moving that direction. See if I can move a few bees around. There she is. You can see her nice long body there, right there. And she's getting ready to lay another egg. Watch her when she slides her abdomen back down into a cell. So she may come on this year. She's already got a little bit bigger brood pattern than what I saw up there. And that's as far as we need to go with this spring inspection on this colony, as we do know that the queen's active, she's laying eggs. We don't want to keep this frame out for very long. So we're gonna stick it back in there and put them back together and let her do her job. And I am going to take this frame of honey and I am going to set it right down in there next to that, because they were a little bit lacking on honey close to the brood chamber. And this outer frame here looks to have honey at the top of it, so I'm not going to do anything with that. I'm going to move this one. I'm going to leave this one kind of on the outer edge. And I'm going to put the ones that had the most honey closer to the brood chamber in the order that they kind of came out, except I've moved one over here. Okay, now, even though I've moved that frame over there, I don't know if this is flat enough. There we go. Now this is homemade fondant that the owner has made for these bees. That would be the bee's owner. And this, you can make this at home. You can go on the internet, find a recipe for it if you want. Pretty simple to make. You want to make them nice and flat. And then I'm going to set this right here above the brood chamber. And they like that. It's like candy for them. Right, give them just a little bit more. And then I'm also going to give them a little bit of the pollen substitute. This just kind of gives them a boost in the spring. If it does get cold again for a week, then they have food inside the colony that they can work from. And then they know you're their friend. This one didn't have an inner cover on it. I don't think there's enough space there, Bo. Let's see. Nope, not really. Most inner covers have a wide side and a narrow side. Narrow side is typically for the winter months. The wide side is typically for the summer months. I'm going to put the wide side down though, because I put that fondant and that pollen substitute in there. And I want the bees to have room around it so that they can take as much of it as they want without being cramped. And that'll work. And we'll put this back on. We'll put our little blanket back in there. The wool blanket also helps absorb moisture in the winter. Helps to keep them a little drier. The wood chips, of course, for insulation as well. And then again, we'll come back in about 3 weeks, weather permitting, and we'll take another look at this little colony. And from what I see today, I'm going to anticipate that they're going to have a pretty good brood chamber going by then. They'll be ready for another box, probably right around the 1st of April. And that's it for the Bees News from Central Oregon. Thanks for coming.